In this episode, I want to talk a little bit about background, middle ground, and foreground, and of course about the specific needs for each. All of that has to do, of course, where the camera is, and that is exactly where my mouse is hovering here at the moment. And the closest area, that is, of course, the area where we can see the most details in an image. And when the camera moves, we see also the most parallax change of an object. It means we go around this and we see it from all sides. Critical part, hotspot here. Then we have the middle ground where we can comfortably go with camera projection. And as I try to convince you here always, that we can get away with maybe a few cubes only, because the whole building here is not really modeled. It's just few cubes and a little bit on top of that. That's all. And we try to create a simulation, an illusion, and that's all we want to do, not more. And to convince the eye is our challenge, not to satisfy our modeling needs. That sounds maybe a little bit sloppy, but that's pretty much what you have to do when you have deadlines. So the background is, of course, just an image here, and I like to take here just the skyline away with an alpha channel. And normally you get here this line in the background. That is easily fixable when you go then from tile, if tile is at all on, to seamless, because then the picture becomes mirrored and it didn't give you the start area here on the floor, because that's mostly the line here and here. So have an eye on these lines. They look up later in the rendering like wires. Not very nice. This needs always to be fixed. Why do this? Because we have the sky object inside of Cinema 4D, and that is a fantastic option to create a seamless sky for the whole scene in one set. And you can store this and you can reuse it and you can animate it. It's fantastic. So this is my first choice in even movie work. I do not shoot a lot images just to get a nice sky. If I can get away with the sky object, I do this. It's more stable, it's the highest quality, no noise, nothing. Okay, and another reason is, of course, I can, against my own advice, get away with just LDRIs, low dynamic range images, because when you take a look to your archive, you might notice that the hottest areas are mostly above the skyline. There are exceptions, of course, and we have already here one, where we have here exactly in the AT&T building a very hot spot from the sun. And I would go, of course, there always with an HDRI if that is visible in reflections, because these hotspots, they turn out into a completely different animal when you have an animation with motion blur or depth of field and all of that. That's not comparable with 8 or 16-bit, and you know my little rant and story about that. Sorry about that moody thing always in that, but it's based on history and experience, bad experience with JPEGs, for example. Not production ready from my point of view. I repeat myself here, and so I go on. What I have done here is, of course, to have shot the whole area as fast as I could. I first went along and took a look, where can I shoot? And then in the shortest time possible, I shot this building here. I went backside to shoot this one here. That's all in that area. And then the whole Pershing square from this perspective and the background here. So the light is really on top of each other, so to say. It all makes sense here. And that's, of course, a very, very important part in the scene creation to get everything convincing. Speaking of convincing, I want to talk about these little guys here. And of course, I go here just and make that big. So you can see that I go now here to 200%, which is then normal HD. This is a proxy camera. Don't go here with any ideas that I think that's ready to go. And these windows here, by the way, they are painted on the wall, except for these guys here. And when there's no reflection, and I try to get a little bit along with the building itself. A lot of painting, there's not so much real on it. It's just the backside of a bigger building. And what I have done here is first to take a look where I can catch the view. So I thought maybe a billboard like this would be a nice editing option, because the normal, and I have talked about this already a long time, the normal idea was to edit from one billboard to the next instead of just cutting the film. And then I have here foreground elements, and I want to define the space where the camera flies with all these objects. These objects here are all in the library, and you can use them, of course. You don't have to model that. And I use them because in the moment you try to photograph this and then make an alpha channel, and then you have only a flat object, you start maybe to do camera projection with that. And then you go here one time around this object nearly, and then everything falls apart. That's maybe not really the ideal. When you take a look from this point, and then you have pretty much a 90-degree here in movement. That would be pretty tough to get this in camera mapping with a short amount of time. It's much easier to just plant here these things and you can move them. What I have done as well is here that fence around the parking lot. I first tried to make an alpha channel, and I thought, you know what, that's so much work and it will never look really well when the resolution of that image is not that high. I could res it up and take another try, but there's also the problem with parallax and all of that. So I erased that out of the image with all the cars on top of that, and created this part here completely in Cinema 4D. Very simple. This billboard here, if you have seen the Adobe Maxon tour some years ago, I had built this for my animation there. And so I reuse these stuff, of course. You see here maybe the WMXN, Windows Macintosh X News or something like that. I don't know. Okay, and you can see here the balconies. I have put them out in one of the last episodes. Here they are in, and so I was talking about real experience. It's a lot of work. And you want to look through it, you want to get some details, and so on. Here you can see the background. And again, background, middle ground, foreground. And what I would suggest highly for these guys here is to render them out with an object buffer, and then render the background without these objects. It's maybe a little bit more work, but as long as you don't have here a huge motion blur with those objects in a scene, you need urgently to make a light wrap here around, because then they sit really in a scene. I see that more than often, that everything is rendered in one pass, and then you have here these ultra sharp edges. No motion blur, no depth of field, it's just razor sharp. And try to shoot something like this with some detail inside, and have a look then on your images that are printed out, or that is printed on celluloid even, how these edges finally look like. They are always different than what you get out of a rendering. And so in compositing, we normally take here that seam and take a blurred version of the background, for example. That is one method, and mix the edge. I have discussed this, of course, in the integration series, so have a look there as well. There are many more tricks to make that more real than just this rendering. Color correction or color grading, then put some lens artifacts in it, some color aberration, and so on. There are many things that makes us believe that we have here real footage in front of us and not just a camera projection. I think that was already everything I have to say about it, because your objects in your scene will look different. But have you seen a big difference between here, and I have not said anything about this garage here and the fence. I have talked about the fence, but do you see here really a difference? That you have one time 3D objects and one time not? That's the magic of Cinema 4D and all its tools. You can see maybe a little slide of that, but it's tiny. Okay, so that wraps it up already. I only wanted to make the hint again. background, middle ground, and foreground. Thanks for listening, and I hope your projects will improve on that. Thank you. Have fun. Bye-bye.